Hey guys, what is going on? It is Crypto Bobby, and today I want to talk to you about buying into pumps and also buying into the dip, and why buying into pumps is usually a very, very bad idea. And when you are buying into the dips, why that is what the smart money is doing. And I want to show you an example of that. And I also want to talk specifically about how it is very, very easy for somebody to just get absolutely demolished, if you are buying into a pump like the one we saw with Bitcoin Cash over the course of the weekend. And now I don't want to necessarily call out Bitcoin Cash as, this isn't an indictment on Bitcoin Cash, is viability in the future of Bitcoin or whatever it is, but I just want to use these two, both Bitcoin Cash and as an example of what happens during a pump, and then Bitcoin as an example of what might happen during a conceded sell-off, and how you can buy into, how you can buy on the sell-off, how you can buy the dip. So if you were sleeping this weekend and you slept the entire weekend, you know that, or basically everybody else in the world, and maybe you don't know, but if you were sleeping this weekend, Bitcoin Cash went from around $600 or so at the start of the weekend all the way up to a peak of around $2,800 during an incredibly crazy spike. And there was a ton of FOMO, and there was a ton of buying into this pump, and there are a lot of people who have gotten, worked pretty good and demolished in terms of their investment, as they might say, wrecked. So when I was looking at this, the first video I made was down here when Bitcoin Cash was around $800, and it was already up quite a bit from the $600 or so range. When I initially looked at Bitcoin Cash and I made the first video, Bitcoin Cash was already up about 30% or so, 35%. And when I saw that, I looked at that and I said, you know what? I think there's a valuable, I think there's a logical thesis right now in terms of investing in Bitcoin Cash if you want to invest in it. But I was a little bit leery of buying into something the size of Bitcoin Cash that was already up 35%. Obviously, I was totally wrong because there was a ton more room to move, but that movement went all the way up from that $800 or so range all the way up to a given time to went up another 156%, and even at its all-time peak about 229% from that $800 or so range. Now, when we're looking at this, there was numerous points in time where FOMO was like really, really kicking in, especially in this range right here where things started to settle down around the $1,300 range. And then over the course of a few hours, Bitcoin Cash pumped all the way up to $2,400, $2,500, $2,600, even above $2,700. Now, I stayed out of this entirely because to be honest, I didn't know how far this pump was going to go, and I did not want to be the one holding the bags. And when it was at $800, I was way preemptive. Quite frankly, I thought that when it was down to $800, it was going to see a sell-off, and then I might be able to, buy in a little bit if I wanted to invest in it. But I didn't want to be the guys up here who bought in at $2,200, $2,000, and then it just absolutely tanked, because every time when I buy into a pump, that is what I'm afraid is going to happen, and why I typically don't do it. Now, if you timed it right, if you bought it at $800, you have made a ton of money. You've been extremely successful, especially if you sold it towards the top. But the big negative about buying into a pump like this, especially if you're not an experienced investor and you really don't know too much about crypto, depending upon where you buy, we are looking at, if you're talking about the absolute peak, if you bought the absolute top to where we are right now, you're talking about a 50% loss in the course of 2 days. If you are looking at buying just the top of the candle here, you're talking about close to a 40% loss. So it's really, really easy if you're buying into a spike, if you don't know exactly, if you really don't know exactly what is going on, why something's spiking, if you don't have a plan of action in place, there are quite a few bag holders here, and there's been people in the YouTube comments, there's been people on Twitter that have reached out and they've said like, hey man, I'm already down thousands and thousands of dollars because I bought in this range right here, and I'm down 30%, 40% on a big investment. And that's the type of thing that you want to avoid as much as possible. Can it pay off sometimes? Yeah, it definitely can, because you might, down here at $1,000, Bitcoin Cash was already up, close to 100%. And if you bought in, that might have been the top, but it turns out it wasn't, and there was still ways to go up. Now, alternatively, you can, when you're trying to time that top, it's really difficult unless you're already in, and you can easily end up as one of these guys up here that's Johnny Bagholder, that is just getting absolutely smoked. And before you look ahead, before you can even refresh your blockfolio, you're down thousands and thousands of dollars and tens of percent. So I think it's a valuable lesson when you look at these charts, and this is not specifically on Bitcoin Cash. This is literally, there's probably multiple charts in cryptocurrency that you could look at, and you could see something exactly like this. So I think it's a valuable lesson just as far as looking at pumps. And when you see something, it's exciting, it's crazy, it's going nuts. Everybody on Twitter is talking about it. Everybody in the Facebook groups are talking about it. Whatever. I tend to stay out of this because I'm leery of getting burned. If you're somebody who doesn't like getting burned, and if you don't want to be the person holding the bag at the top, I would suggest you stay out of it. If you're somebody who likes to gamble and you want to see, hey, maybe this isn't the top, and I could ride this wave for a little bit more power to you. But just know that there's a lot of risks associated with something spiking this quickly. So that's a little bit of what I wanted to talk about in regards to the pump and how that works. But on the other end of the spectrum, Mike Novogratz, who I've spoken about before, this is an article in Reuters, and he had a conversation recently, and he had discussed I think, two really interesting points. Number one, he talked about mainstream institutional investors, which I've talked about a bunch on the show before, on the channel before, and how that is going to be really critical to driving up the price of Bitcoin and potentially Ethereum if they have access to Ethereum, but mostly Bitcoin, because I believe that'll be the one cryptocurrency that will be quote unquote institutionalized for investing purposes. Now, interestingly enough, he said that he expects major financial firms to be offering products to purchase Bitcoin over the phone or through institutional means, and the price is he thinks that the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum, when that happens, it's going to drive the prices up significantly, obviously, because if big institutional money is coming into the space and there are the controls and the regulation, not necessarily the regulations, but there are the controls and custodial services around Bitcoin and potentially around Ethereum, and that money that wants those outsized returns that Bitcoin have provided in the past, that'll continue to drive up the price. And so he said this at the Reuters Global Investment Summit in New York recently. But the one thing that I thought was really, outside of just the institutional money coming into the space, which I think is a big deal and is something that is really important, outside of the institutional money that is going to come in eventually, like he said, if there's anybody in the know about institutional money coming into the space, it is going to be Mike Novogratz, coming from ex-Goldman, ex-Fortress Investments, and coming from that area, if there's anybody that knows a lot about that. But interestingly enough too, I think this is one of the things so I thought was really interesting. During the latest pullback over the weekend, we'll pull up Bitcoin Cash here, so we'll pull up the weekend. I'll hop over to GDAX for this. So we can see here over the weekend where Bitcoin went down. This is Bitcoin, not Bitcoin Cash, but where Bitcoin went down from, it's basically all-time high of around $7,900 down to $5,600 on two separate occasions, is now above $6,500. So there were two separate instances in the course of the weekend on November 12th, and then on November 12th in the afternoon, and in the afternoon and in the morning, where Bitcoin went down quite a bit, dipped all the way to that 5,700 range. Now, this is somebody that I would consider, Mike Novogratz is somebody that I would consider smart money in the space, that knows what they're doing, that has a extensive career in the financial industry and the trading industry. Somebody that bought Ethereum very early on, took profits, and bought himself a Gulfstream private jet. During the latest pullback over the weekend, you can see here, he bought $15 to $20 million worth of Bitcoin. So that's the type of thing that I think goes to teach you a lesson too, as far as when this is happening, when something like this, when this sell-off is happening. If you are, I think it maybe only goes for a few cryptocurrencies out there, because there have been obviously a number of cryptocurrencies that are specifically very, very high, or very, very far percentage off their all-time high and just haven't recovered at all. But Bitcoin is one of those cryptocurrencies that seems to continue to go up and go up. And so if you are if there is a significant dip, the opportunity to buy on that dip is a big time chance to dollar cost average your way in and get cheaper Bitcoin. And that is what the smart money did here. Mike Novogratz, like you said, bought $15 to $20 million worth of Bitcoin on the latest pullback. Now, I don't know. It doesn't specifically say how far it was on the pullback. Maybe this is considered the pullback where we're at right here. Maybe he bought at the, in the 5,800 range. For me personally, when I saw this going down, like I talked about recently, I sold a little bit at the $6,900 range, did a market sell at the $6,900 range, and then on GDAX bought back in at $5,900. So that was a pretty successful trade for me, was being able to, I think I took up a pretty good, was able to increase my Bitcoin stack by quite a bit there. And then, was able to buy back in at the $5,900 range and ride that wave up and still just holding on to that at this point in time. So I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people out there, is when people are freaking out and when everybody out there is talking about, Bitcoin is done, Bitcoin Cash is going to be the next Bitcoin, Bitcoin is going to $2,500, Bitcoin's going to $3,000. There are people out there that are confident in the technology and that know what's happening and confident in this from an investment perspective, and are looking at this as a significant opportunity. And when they see dips like that, when they see dips that don't necessarily have a specific, there is a reason behind it. It's a lot of the competition with Bitcoin Cash and some other another variety of factors, but does it fundamentally change things for the time being? Not necessarily. So that smart money is taking that gamble and saying, hey, this is a pullback. We expect this to get back to its all-time high. We expect this to maybe exceed $10,000 in the next year or so. So we're going to buy that Bitcoin and we're going to hold on to it. And we're going to let it ride. So I think that's something that is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting as we continue to develop. Now, also on top of that, one of the things that I saw in this article is Mike Novogratz is a pretty big advocate, it seems like, for Ethereum and for investing in Ethereum. And that was one move that I thought, seeing confidence from him in Ethereum was interesting. I know there's a lot of debate, especially with the parity hack recently, about the level of sophistication with the Ethereum technology and how secure it is, how safe it is, and a lot of other issues around Ethereum. I personally am a pretty big fan of Ethereum. I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm not an Ethereum maximalist. I do like both. I get Bitcoin Cash. I get the need for it. I get the variety of factors around it. So I try to stay as neutral as possible here. But when I read some of the information here about Ethereum too, I actually went ahead and increased a little bit more stake in Ethereum, and so far it was last night really, and so far that's turned out pretty well. If we pull up the chart here, got into Ethereum around $315, and that's all the way up, selling off a little bit right now, but it was up to 335 or so, and is now back down to 324. But it's been an interesting run so far, and Ethereum has not performed well in the past 2 or so months. It really hasn't kept up with Bitcoin. It hasn't kept up with a lot of the other cryptocurrencies out there. But when you see somebody like this increasing a little bit of their stake in Ethereum and going forward, I just wanted a little bit more exposure to see what might happen there, and try to, for me personally, try to follow the smart money and the people that are much smarter than me in a lot of respects. And I think that's something that, I did here, was just looking at increasing the stake and seeing what some of the information that Novogratz was saying and why he thinks that the value of Ethereum might go up in addition to Bitcoin. So that is something on my end that I'm looking at, and I think is really interesting. One last thing I'll say too is, so I'll put the link to the article below. I would definitely recommend it. It's worth a read, regardless of just your overall thoughts and feelings on things. It's good to, like I've always said, it's good to understand opposing points of view, even if you don't necessarily agree with somebody like Mike Novogratz. But it's good to understand opposing points of view, so that you can always understand why somebody's thinking something, why they're making investment decisions, and you can craft your own investment decisions around that, so you can always be better, more intelligent, more informed. And I think that's something that's really crucial and critical for you to be successful overall. Now, outside of that, guys, want to let you know that it will be doing most likely we'll be doing a crypto happy hour this evening at around 9 p.m. So if you'd like to join for that crypto happy hour tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time, so hit that subscribe button and hit the notify button if you'd like to join me for that event. And I'll also put a link in the comments so you have that running. Crypto Bobby signing out. Have a good one. Peace.